Welcome back, everybody. I mean, this has just been a phenomenal day so far, and I'm going to continue to emphasize the arc of the story we're trying to tell here through all of this work we've done for all of you on the line on the playbook. Again, starting with Amy Abernathy, she talked about the need to engage our regulatory colleagues. We highlighted the critical role of our clinical colleagues. We talked about the need to get executive buy-in. We talked about starting with the measure. We talked about making it work in practice. We talked about the role of our academic colleagues. We talked about, hey, let's zoom out and see, what does that policy roadmap look like? How do we get to a future state? That has been just a phenomenal overview of what we've achieved together through the playbook. And I'm really excited to share, and Jean will do a little bit of a walk through what we've put together. Another novel process that we put together, this team was very bold. We wanted to answer the question, like, how can we get to a point where we can really demystify and disarm the fear and uncertainty and doubt around these measures? And if Jean, if I could just ask you to share, perfect, thank you. How can we get to a point where instead of saying, maybe this will collapse things, really walking through, and a pre-mortem starts at the end. It starts at a point of failure, and really looks back and passes out what were the actual risks that could potentially have happened to get us to this point of failure. And similarly, what could we have done in order to make sure that they never happen in practice? It's a powerful tool, and this team worked incredibly hard on a short period of time, not only to design the use case, and our use case was the use of moderate to vigorous physical activity in a pivotal trial, making a labeling claim using that measure, completing everything, all of the data collection, and we look at what we have in hand and we think, my goodness, we cannot submit this. The quality of the evidence isn't here. We need to abandon. That's the point of failure that we think so many folks in medical product development are nervous about. So we dug into that use case. It was a tangible example. We looked back, we could pass out, look, what are the challenges that aren't going to result in this failure? And what are the challenges that are? And where we see them, what are their root causes? And how do we solve for them? All of that information, a wealth of information, is available to you in this new dossier. We can look at the sort of key areas of failure. We'll get to those together. And now let's move across into conversation and meet the very bold and audacious team that was willing to take a leap of faith with us and sort of move into these new digital measures. And we'll start with a quick round of introductions to get to know everyone a little bit. And Virginia, let me bring you up to the stage here and tap you in first if we can. Please introduce yourself to everyone on the line.
Hi, everyone. My name is Virginia Parks. I'm with Servier in translational medicine, but when the tour of duty was in full swing, I was with Takeda in the digital strategy group for research and development.
Fantastic. Thanks, Virginia. Nicki, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Jen. I'm Nicki Bush, and I lead the Patient-Focused Outcomes Center of Expertise at Eli Lilly and Company.
Fantastic. Kate, do you want to go next?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Kate Lyden, Chief Science Officer at VivoSense, data analytics and science team company, focusing on digital clinical measures and clinical trials in healthcare.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kate. Marissa, do you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Marissa Dockendorf. I am a director in the Global Digital Analytics and Technologies group at Merck. And my team and I are focused on enabling adoption of digital clinical measures and digital technologies in our clinical drug development trials.
Fantastic. Thanks, Marissa. Santosh.
Hey, everyone. I'm Santosh from Mumbai. I am a healthcare consultant with background in pharmaceutical R&D, having worked at Novartis, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson.
Fantastic. And I think, Betsy, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Betsy Tschosik. I'm the head of digital innovation in patient-centered outcomes research at Genentech.
I'm doing a horrible job. If I don't have a list, I'm not going to get it. Celia, you're next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Celia Fidalgo. I'm a senior product lead at Winterlight Labs, which is a digital health company developing speech-based biomarkers for clinical use.
Fantastic. And Xuemei is going to join us. She's actually in clinic today. So she's on the line and she's going to dial in, and we'll do her intro when she's at a place where she can chat. So we teed up, or I tried to tee up a little bit about the problem we were trying to solve for, this level of sort of confusion, being able to sort of struggle a little bit in this new field to take a truly risk-based approach to decision-making, because so many of those risks are new and poorly understood. Marissa, I want to come to you first. I gave a little bit of a thumbnail on sort of the pre-mortem process, how it helps us start at the end and look back and be a little bit more sort of informed about, you know, would this really have happened? What's the likelihood of it? What's the likelihood of it sort of impacting us in the way that we fear the most? Tell us about your experience with the process. And, you know, one of the key findings was the substantial sort of majority of risks we identified were either not going to lead to the sort of failure we've been so worried about, or were quite unlikely to occur. Was that what you were expecting?
Yeah, thanks, Jen, for the question. And first of all, I want to say that I found this process to be really extremely helpful in sort of starting at the end and looking back and identifying the challenges and what we could have done to help mitigate those risks. I think that much of the industry might find those findings surprising, that because fear of failure is really just a huge barrier to adoption. And so, yeah, and while it's certainly not as straightforward as, you know, just taking a technology and deploying it, there are a lot of things you need to think through ahead of time. I think really outlining what you need to think through ahead of time, what the upfront work required is really helpful. Hopefully will help assuage some of those fears and really be a tool for teams to utilize to help reduce that barrier to adoption.
Marissa, I really like how you teed that up there. And, you know, Virginia, when we were sort of going through, when we were structuring this and thinking about, you know, how are we going to organize our thinking, we teed up these sort of 4 theme areas: data quality and management, technology and vendor relations, study design, operations and management. You know, 4 big hefty buckets where all this failure was going to happen. And interestingly, even though we passed it out into these 4 buckets, I need to come up with a better word for buckets, but for now, that's what we'll use. You know, when we actually sort of put everything together, and through the course of the day, we were going into breakouts, we were coming back, we did this as a pretty aggressive workshop. There are a lot of similarities across these different 4 areas. A lot of the risks are similar, regardless of, you know, how we might have first characterized the risk. How do you interpret that? How does that help us move forward?
Thanks for the question, Jen. So I think, again, you know, this isn't really surprising because, you know, a lot of the concerns that surfaced during the pre-mortem exercise are not new or specific to digital measures, but have tended to plague the field, you know, since the year dot, basically. So whatever the nature of the risks, and but the solutions obviously may be different when to traditional clinical trial approaches when you're using digital measures. So if you're using patient-reported outcomes, for example, the solutions and the risks will be slightly different. Some of the errors that occur along the way are involved any of these themes, from study design and operations to data quality, tech and vendor management, will affect whether the measure is going to be considered reliable and validated as an endpoint in a clinical trial. But I think interesting is the question about missing data, actually. So in the case of missing data, which is one of the top rated risks over all of the themes that you've mentioned. So whether through technology failure and transmission issues or user error, or non-compliance and lack of training, the solutions, you know, they include patient engagement at every stage. So the patients really become a key focus in terms of the digital measures. And, you know, the onus is on them to ensure that the data is collected. So ensuring, you know, sufficient training and support that's delivered to the patients, and it's essential. And also optimizing the trial design, for example, to reduce the likelihood of missing data via reducing patient burden, for example, in the trial design. And, you know, other areas are optimizing the statistical analysis plan, overall applying good practices as far as we can. But I want to return to a comment you made at the very beginning, Jen, and that was about we have this tendency to be walking on eggshells, right? And so sort of in terms of advancing digital endpoints. And I think it's important to mention, and also around missing data, And that is, previously in traditional methods, if you had missing data, often you would just completely tank your trial, right? Just basically, just due to the nature of data collection, where there's sparse data points, you would get late notifications of that the instruments haven't been used, so you would have not done or something over too many endpoints. And whereas with digital endpoints, you can implement a technology monitoring plan, for example, and you could receive alerts that data is not coming in, and you can mitigate against that. So I think that's interesting from what you said at the beginning. So should we really be walking on eggshells? I think that's the question I'm trying to bring out here. So so we do have, in terms of missing data, many more ways of dealing with it. Just due to the continuous and high frequency data collection, and this provides additional opportunities for understanding the data and interpreting the results, of course. So yes, standardization will be important, as will a common language around the novel digital endpoints and the ability to make label claims off of them. But I think this pre-mortem, helps us to think about the differentiation from traditional methods and traditional methodology in clinical trials, and why those trials have failed, and compared to the novel digital measures as well.
Virginia, really interesting and important remarks, and I want to sort of take a little bit of a step sideways from that and say, when you mentioned specific solutions, capabilities that we have to mitigate some of these risks. And I think that was the really powerful thing about this work. And when everyone goes into this particular tool, so for folks who are keen to find it, when you're in the Playbook website, if you go to the tool section, you'll find everything we did here on the pre-mortem. It wasn't just that we dug down, we got the root causes, and we came up with solutions from them. We also came up with tactical solutions to every challenge. Somewhere on a whiteboard there is a solution, and in many places it's organized quite well for you to be able to map that challenge that you have on deck to the solution you have. We came at it from every altitude, from those sort of systemic challenges all the way through to sort of tasks at hand. And it was an extraordinary piece of work from you all, and something I'm very excited to get out into the field. So Virginia, you gave really good voice to those sort of tactical solutions that we have on deck and how we can think differently about how they change our view of risk. Santosh, I want to come to you because in addition to seeing similarities in risks across these 4 different areas, we also saw, real similarity in root causes. In fact, I would go so far as to say that we were able to tease out 3 root causes. We need to make sure, we've made the right vendor selection. We need to make sure we have sufficient in-house capabilities. We need to make sure that we're allowing sufficient time for these critical to quality processes. Again, what's the so what here? What can we learn from this?
Yeah, so at Dyne, we always believe that, in doing work at text timeline, but with clinical quality. But what we realized during the pre-mortem, looking at the use case and thinking about why some of these risks would happen, we realized that, a lot of teams generally favor the tech timeline piece and want to give away the, or not think about the clinical quality piece. And that's where I think the imbalance comes. That's where the root causes lie. So there can be technical issues, technical gaps like ill-defined data, integration or misalignment of goals from the technical side to the clinical side, so on and so forth, but also a lot of issues like assuming stuff that these things will happen, or over-reliance on a tech partner and not understanding how these things would merge and so on and so forth. So when folks will see at the process and the pointers that you're talking about on the website, they will see that these were the root causes. These are how we reached the root causes by asking these 5 why kind of technologies, asking the question again, why would this happen? Why would this happen? So on and so forth. So to sum it up, really, what we realize is we really want to help teams strike this balance between speed and quality, and that could come only by thinking about some of these root causes.
I really like that. And as we think about the balance between speed and quality, ideally we have both. If we have to err in one direction, we should be erring towards quality, but, the pressures are real. That balance between the systemic changes at the root cause level and also those sort of tactical solutions, both of which we outline as a consequence of this work. But let's talk about the structural pieces. Let's talk about the fundamental change within sort of medical product development that actually de-risks fundamentally and, hopefully permanently sort of the use of these measures. And we'll go through each of them in turn. And Betsy, I'd like to come to you. So again, I'll refresh folks' memories. One of the sort of key issues, the key root causes, the key challenges we found was, in some cases, maybe the absence or an underdeveloped sort of internal skill set, expertise, infrastructure to bring people together and do this work. Tell us a little bit why, from your vantage point, why getting this right by having sufficient skills in-house and the right people at the table is so critically important.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the simple answer is you don't know what you don't know, which became very apparent to me as we went through this. And as a team, we were identifying these risks and going through the why did this happen and why, there are 5 whys to go down and really kind of find the root cause. And there were a lot of things that the team members identified as root causes that I would have had no idea about myself. And I think that the nice fact there is that I don't have to know everything myself. I'm part of a large team, and we can call on our other team members as experts to the table. And just for a few examples, if you go in and you dive into our poster and you start looking at some of the risks that we identified, one of the risks was maybe you picked the wrong endpoint for your trial. And then your tool worked fine, it was all great, but you can't actually answer the clinical question that you wanted to answer. You're not actually showing any treatment benefit because it wasn't the right endpoint to pick. So maybe that's because you didn't have the measurement scientist or clinical scientist involved early on to help identify what would be a meaningful endpoint, or even the biostatistician to really determine the construction of that endpoint. Another one was around digital health technology tools not being maintained throughout the life of a study. And maybe there, you didn't have people who are really familiar with the operations aspects of implementing a digital tool in a clinical trial, who could set up these requirements with the vendor and understand the type of operational support that you need. So when you don't have the right expertise, you can't even ask the right questions, and you can't mitigate those risks. So really, it just, but the great part is we've all got that expertise around us, and just bringing the right people to the right table at the right time can make our trials so much more successful.
And Betsy, I love that you were able to serve up a few examples for us from sort of the overall poster and all of the boards we made available to folks where we did this work, which is, as we dove into these questions that I've certainly sort of have knowledge of being, near showstoppers in some cases, that actually when we dive down into those root causes, when we bring the right folks to the table, when we collaborate, when we have the right skills, they are absolutely solvable issues, and there is a path forward and there is a path to success. Kate, I'd like to come to you next. So 2 of 3 of our sort of, root causes that structurally we have to solve for. We have to start doing this in a different way for success. We talked about picking the right technology as being table stakes for success, but we took it further. We identified that it's not just the right technology, it's also making sure you've picked the right vendor partner. And if that doesn't happen, there's a high likelihood of downstream problems. So tell us about how you may have seen that pan out and how folks can get better at sort of thinking about a vendor partner instead of a single technology.
Yeah, so thanks, Jen. First, I will just say that I think that participating in this sprint team was actually quite a bit of fun. I work inside a technology company, so I spend a lot of time engaging with different sponsors that are at different stages of, adoption for digital clinical measures. And I think a lot about how do I help these potential clients overcome their fears or the barriers for further adoption, and how do they take the next step. And I initially, when I started this, thought, I was just a naive scientist, and I thought, well, it's all about the science. We can do such better science with these tools. We can improve outcomes. The potential to improve outcomes is huge. But I think as part of this process and what I've learned over time is that it's not always about the science, like in the outcomes, as we would like to think that it is. We also need to consider operations, costs, logistics, even just overcoming mindsets that have been kind of, just baked into this process for so long. The inertia that's inherent to these systems is really difficult to overcome sometimes. So I think that taking part in this sprint and really, tackling this question from a systematic approach was really fun. And I think I think folks will find it valuable, so I hope that they do. But to get to your question about selecting the right tech vendor, I think that the operations sprint team earlier today actually had some really spot on comments around this and how selecting the correct vendor is really, really important. But at the end of the day, I think the reality is that to be successful in using digital clinical measures in clinical trials or healthcare, at some point, we need to trust the vendors. We need to reach that point. And depending on, what type of vendor they are, they may be inserted all along the study and the data continuum. And when it comes to delivering the results and ultimately submitting findings to any regulatory agency, their involvement's likely going to be very, very critical. So I think the question for me is how do we reach that point of trust much, much quicker? And I think, obviously trust comes with time and experience. But as Betsy alluded to, what types of questions do we ask our tech vendors? Who do we have at the table to have those conversations with the tech vendors so that we can truly understand that communication is occurring between the sponsor and the tech vendor? All of those things are really important pieces to tackle. And I think that we can dive into those, really far. But for me, I think as someone that spent a lot of time inside different tech companies, one of the most important questions to reach that point of trust early on in the conversation is for the user to ask the tech company, what are the specific risks and points of failure associated with the use of your technology? Like, we all know that there are failures and risks associated with technology. We experience them every single day. And so we shouldn't assume that these technologies are going to work, perfectly all of the time. But I think we can expect of our tech vendors that they're transparent about what those risks are and what the rate of those risks are. I think that really helps build trust between the tech company and the potential sponsor or client. So that's just one high-level piece of advice I would give. And then I would also say to my tech colleagues that I understand that we as innovators sometimes need to maintain proprietary stances on things, algorithms, different technologies, whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, we can't be a barrier or a source of mistrust and doubt for the very groups that are trying to adopt our products. So I just think that really, open lines of communication between vendors and sponsors will move this field forward. So.
Kate, really, really thoughtful remarks there and a powerful call to action, right? On folks of, what we should no longer think of both sides of things, but among our sort of medical product developers and our sort of tech colleagues. I also really liked something you said. We've talked about how the root causes require sort of structural change vis-a-vis the sort of tactical solutions that we came up as almost sort of patches in the moment. You also talked about the need for sort of cultural changes. And I think that was, a bit of a theme throughout this. I think even the process itself, there were aha moments about the value different colleagues can bring to the conversation. So I really like that. There's those sort of tactical solutions that we articulate for folks. And then these 3 root causes that we need to pursue to affect structural change and cultural change. And we've all got responsibility for that. Celia, I'd like to call on you, if I can, to talk about sort of the 3rd root cause, really thinking about or acknowledging that there are new steps in this process. We're using new tools and resources, and there are new steps. And we need to give them the necessary resources and time when they are critical to quality steps. And one of the examples that came up time and again, though certainly not the only one, is around analytical validation, for example, that this is a step that's new. It may not be one that we give sufficient time to. And when we don't conduct it in a sufficiently broad population, for example, we can run into difficulty. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of why this is important, why we need to acknowledge our new partners and the new steps?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jen. So we absolutely want the confidence that our sensor or algorithm is measuring what we think it's measuring. And to get that confidence, we need to run validation studies in our clinical populations, as you said, in the right context of use. So patient populations will behave differently from healthy control groups and potentially in unexpected ways. And those unexpected behaviors may affect our sensor or algorithm's ability to detect the measure of interest. So a simple example that I think of from speech measurement is that if we generate values for how many nouns and verbs patients are saying, we need to verify how accurately we're measuring those different parts of speech in different contexts. So a system may be really accurate at counting parts of speech in young native English speakers, but starting to make mistakes if someone is older or has dementia or has an accent, or if they're speaking different languages from English, or if they're in remote settings rather than in clinic settings. So planning and conducting those studies takes time. We also need to think about generating our gold standard for validation. So whether that gold standard is manually counting, whether we need to bring in experts to generate those gold standards, that takes time as well. And then the results that we get from the validation study may change how we choose to implement or use that technology later on. So we need to think about planning time to iterate on how we use the technology. So ultimately, all of these steps can be planned in advance. It's just necessary to do so that we can be confident in the accuracy of our measure and also understand its limitations.
Celia, such great examples. And I think, it goes back to another theme we've heard through the day, right? Which is, there is a push, there is an urgency to serve the patients that we're all here to serve. There's also business reasons why we push so hard on timelines. And if we really want this to be successful, we need to give it the time and the respect early on with the right colleagues, as Betsy articulated, with the right partners, as Kate articulated, to do the critical to quality steps, Celia, that you articulated, and we were able to identify through this pre-mortem process. And, what I'm really proud of is we've come to a clear understanding of why we're driving towards this goal. We did that with the policy dossier. Throughout this playbook work, we've talked about the patients we're all here to serve, the efficiencies we're trying to gain, so on and so forth. It's all great, but how do we actually affect these? How do we implement these structural and cultural changes? We have those tactical tools, they're there too, but how do we actually be part of those sort of longer term changes? And Xuemei, I'll come to you first to answer that question. And if you want to do a quick intro to everyone, and then sort of help us think about how we might approach affecting this long-term change.
Thanks, Jen, and apologies because I've missed some of the session here for a study visit. So I apologize if I'm speaking or repeating that I said, but I coming up with trying to, not just talk about. Sorry. Am I coming in? My internet is actually a little choppy over here.
It is a little bit, and I don't want to cut you off, so maybe I can suggest this. I was going to call on both you and Nicki to address this question. If you want to try and dial in, Nicki, let's come to you. Give us one part of the charge, and then Xuemei will circle back and make sure we hear from you before we wrap. So Nicki, go ahead. Same question. How are we going to actually make this happen?
Yeah, well, I think the obvious is take the information that's there and use it. Don't just let it sit on a virtual shelf. And the other piece, I think Amy Abernathy said this morning, have fun. And that we can see this as a list of a group of checklists or dossiers or rules, or we can see it as some guiding light or some foundational principles from which we can grow and build, right? And I think if we see it that way, it can help us bring the right people to the table, to Betsy's point. We can use it as a central document to reground and recenter us, but we can build on it and really use it to expand our horizons and not close us in. And if we start using it that way and build it in the nature that it was meant, I think that will help us move the field further instead of that feeling of holding ourselves back. Which I think is where some of that fear comes from. And so hopefully this takes away a little bit of the fear to allow us to innovate more, which would be great. So it's a matter of using it and trying to break it, because that's how you can make sure you're really, really using it, right? Like dig down, and if it doesn't seem right, then tweak it for what you need. But it's a good foundational start.
Fantastic. Nicki, I really like that. And I love how you were able to tie it into our sort of opening remarks. And one thing we certainly did tremendously well with this team, you guys worked incredibly hard, all of the prep for the pre-mortem, from identifying the use case to doing the necessary pre-work to co-hosting with me and Jean and our colleagues at Echo Consulting. A really, really terrific day with, I think, 50 experts on the line all at once in breakouts, back coming together, sharing expertise. It was absolutely extraordinary. And I think that's borne out for anyone who dives into this suite of resources. You will see the evidence of that work. And Xuemei, I'm fingers crossed we can hear from you for parting remarks, because you are such an important part of this. Tell us about how we're going to get this right. How are we going to actually make these structural and cultural changes?
I think in closing, I just wanted to say that I think it's really about the individuals, as we throw these ideas out, and then as we talk to each other, and then we all have other ecosystems that we work in and other groups and companies. And as we spread these ideas out, I think that, we all face similar challenges, and hearing and working in this group and seeing now, also looking forward at some of the upcoming meetings and some of the upcoming topics from a regulatory perspective. There's some members of this team, but then there's other, participants that are coming in. And so as we just start, from a small circle and then move into broader and broader and broader circles, almost like, a sound wave that's coming through, you get one person and then it influences the next person. And as these ideas, really take root, it may seem like it's starting small and incremental, but it can, like a sound wave, really, build up, as it gets further and further out.
Fantastic. And what I hope, I love the sound wave, because we have Celia from Winterlight on the line. And Celia, you spend a lot of time every day thinking about sound waves. So Xuemei, that was the perfect example. The other thing I think, and Xuemei, you mentioned it so nicely, how can this be a ripple effect? We didn't just toss a pebble in a pond when we did this work together. I think we put out a boulder. So my hope is that that can really sort of amplify in all directions to all of our partners and stakeholders. This particular piece of work, again, Virginia, Xuemei, Nicki, Marissa, Santosh, Betsy, Kate, Celia, you took a leap of faith with us. You probably had no idea how we would land this particular body of work. It was an extraordinary learning experience for us. I'm thrilled with what we were able to tease out of this, and I'm very grateful for the work that you did.